The cry tore from her throat before she could stop it. "Please don't sell me." Her hands shook as she clutched the frayed edge of her dress, eyes darting across the crowded market where voices collided, and coins clinked like rain on stone. She had learned that pleading rarely changed anything, yet instinct forced the words out anyway. The man standing before her looked different from the others at first. Dust on his boots, weariness in his posture, but he didn't circle her or prod her arm. He stood still, as if the noise around them had suddenly gone quiet. The seller barked a price, impatient, already turning to call the next customer. The man frowned and slid his hand into his pocket, then froze, fingers brushing against emptiness. He checked again, slower this time, and finally pulled out a small bundle of crumpled bills and mismatched coins, counting them twice as though hoping more might appear. It wasn't enough, not by any fair measure. The seller laughed, shaking his head, but the man lifted his gaze, steady and calm, and said, "It's all I have." There was no pride in his voice, only resolve. Greed weighed the moment down, then tipped the scale. The seller snatched the money and shoved a paper forward. The girl flinched, waiting for the familiar grip on her wrist, the tug that meant ownership. It never came. Instead, the man stepped aside and held out his hand, not to claim her, but to offer balance as she rose. "You don't have to be afraid," he said quietly, as if fear were something that could listen. She searched his face for the lie she expected to find, but there was only exhaustion and a strange gentleness that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. They moved away from the stall, the market's roar dulling behind them, and with each step her breath came a little easier. She didn't know why he had done it, why he had given away the last of what he owned, for a stranger who had nothing to offer in return. She only knew that for the first time in a long while, no one was pulling her forward. She was walking beside someone, and that small difference felt like the beginning of something she barely dared to imagine. They walked until the shouts of the market faded into a distant hum, replaced by the softer sounds of evening settling in. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting someone to run after them and drag her back, but no one did. The man slowed near a small food stall and counted the few coins he had, borrowed from a passerby who recognized his desperation. He bought a loaf of bread and a cup of thin soup, then handed both to her without a word. She stared at the food, confused, waiting for instructions she understood too well. Eat later, eat less, eat only if allowed. When none came, her hands trembled as she took a bite, the warmth nearly undoing her. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she ate, embarrassed by her hunger but unable to stop. The man sat a short distance away, looking out toward the river, giving her space as if that too were a gift. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Why did you do it?" He didn't answer right away. He skipped a stone across the water and watched the ripples fade. "Because I know what it's like to be sold by life," he said at last. He told her about losing his land, his home, and the people he loved, when debt swallowed everything he touched. He spoke without bitterness, just quiet honesty, and she listened, as though every word stitched something torn inside her. She realized he wasn't strong in the way men at the market pretended to be. His strength was different, thin, worn, but unbroken. As the sky darkened, the cold crept in. He shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The fabric smelled of dust and smoke, but it was warm, and the weight of it felt protective rather than heavy. They built a small fire, and for the first time in years, she slept without ropes, without fear of waking to orders. When dawn came, she startled awake, panic surging until she saw him still there, tending the fire unchanged. Later that morning, he took a folded paper from his pocket and held it over the flames. Her breath caught as she realized what it was. "No," she whispered, frightened by what freedom might demand of her. He met her eyes and let the paper burn. "You don't belong to anyone," he said gently. "Not me, not them." She didn't know how to stand on her own yet, but as they walked together down the open road, she felt something unfamiliar growing inside her. It wasn't certainty or courage, not yet, but it was hope, fragile and real, and for the first time it felt allowed. The road stretched wide and uncertain ahead of them, bordered by dry grass and scattered trees that whispered in the wind. She walked a step behind him at first, habit forcing her body into old patterns. But he noticed and slowed until they were side by side. Every so often, he pointed out small things, tracks in the dirt, a distant farmhouse, the way clouds thickened before rain, as if teaching her to look at the world not as a threat, but as a place filled with signs she could learn to read. At night they shared stories by the fire. She spoke little, her past knotted with pain she wasn't ready to untangle. But she listened as he talked about places he had seen, roads that led somewhere kinder, and the idea that a person could choose who they became. Those words felt dangerous and thrilling all at once. Days passed, and with them came small changes. He showed her how to count coins properly, how to judge a fair trade, how to meet someone's eyes without flinching. When they stopped in villages, he never spoke for her, never claimed her as his responsibility. Instead, he stood nearby, watchful but respectful, allowing her to find her own voice, even when it shook. The first time she bargained for bread on her own, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the coins. When she succeeded, she laughed, a short, startled sound, and covered her mouth, as if afraid the world might punish her for it. He smiled, saying nothing, and that quiet pride meant more to her than praise ever could. One evening, as rain fell softly around their camp, she finally asked the question that had been growing heavier in her chest. "What happens to me when you leave?" He didn't pretend not to understand. He poked the fire thoughtfully and said, "You keep going. You build something that's yours." The idea scared her more than chains ever had. Being owned was cruel, but it was simple. Freedom demanded choices, and choices meant risk. Sensing her fear, he added, "You won't be alone. Not because someone owns you, but because you'll learn how to stand with others." When they reached a crossroads marked by a weathered post, he stopped. He pressed a small bundle into her hand, coins carefully saved. She tried to refuse, tears blurring her vision, but he closed her fingers gently around them. "This isn't payment," he said. "It's a beginning." As she watched him walk away down the opposite road, she felt the ache of loss, but also something stronger rising within her. She straightened her back, wiped her tears, and took her first step forward alone, carrying not his money, but the belief he had given her, that her life was finally her own. Years passed, measured not by seasons alone, but by the steady strengthening of her spine and voice. The town she settled in was small and unremarkable, the kind of place most travelers pass through without remembering. And that was why she chose it. She worked first in kitchens and stables, honest labor that paid little, but asked nothing of her dignity. Each coin she earned reminded her of the day a man had emptied his pocket for her sake, and she treated money not as power, but as responsibility. She learned to read notices nailed to wooden posts, to recognize danger before it found her, and to trust her instincts without letting fear rule them. Some nights were still heavy with old memories, but morning always came and she met it standing. Word traveled quietly, the way important truths often do. People noticed that she listened, that she didn't look away when others were afraid. When a frightened girl appeared, at the edge of town with no family, and too many bruises in her eyes, it was to her door that someone knocked. She didn't hesitate. She remembered the riverbank, the coat on her shoulders, the paper burning to ash. She offered food first, then space, then choice. She never promised safety she couldn't give, but she promised honesty, and that mattered more. Soon there were others, runaways, the desperate, the nearly broken, and she helped them find work, shelter, and sometimes just the courage to take one more step. One afternoon, the market grew loud in a familiar, unsettling way. A man argued prices too harshly, a girl standing beside him with her head bowed. The sight tightened her chest, but she didn't freeze. She walked forward, calm and steady, her voice clear enough to cut through the noise. She asked questions, challenged lies, and drew attention where silence had once protected cruelty. People gathered. Coins changed hands, not for ownership, but for debt settled and wrongs corrected. The girl looked up at her with the same disbelief she once felt, and something inside her settled into place. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she stood alone at the edge of the market, and allowed herself a moment of remembrance. She never learned where the man went or what became of him. She hoped he had found peace, or at least a road that didn't hurt so much. Pulling a small, worn coin from her pocket, kept all these years, she closed her fingers around it and smiled softly. He had given her more than freedom. He had taught her what it meant to give without owning, to help without saving, and to believe that one act of quiet courage could echo far beyond a single day.